Welcome. We are going to talk about how to take care of myself as a helper in the light of encountering trauma and strong emotions. It's part 7 in this session sequence. I just wanted you to see a nice picture of this. Yeah. So it's meant to symbolize how we can support each other. The overview of this is to say something about that as a helper, our main resource is our capacity for compassion, for empathy. That's the main resource we have to build upon. But at the same time, this capacity for empathy and compassion is also that makes us most vulnerable. Human defenders, psychologists, social workers, or other helpers, empathy and engagement are the main motivation for our work, but it's also the core of our ability to be wounded at our work. So how can we last? How can we be there in the field and not and maintain professional and personal growth ourselves? Because if we just go in and use all our capacity for compassion and engagement and everything, we easily get burned out very quickly. And we need to last long. So in this lecture is 3 questions. It's to be aware what things triggers you most, what kind of things burdens you most, what kind of stories you hear or see, or what kind of circumstances in the long run burdens you most. And how do you notice that you are on the edge, you have signals that you are really on the edge of becoming burnout? How do you recognize that in yourself? And what do you think is helpful? Because we can't just give out, we have to get something in. We have to refill ourselves. In this session, I'm going to say, take a break, sit down, write. And then you have to stop the film. Because I'm not stopping waiting here, but you can stop the film. And you can write down what kind of exercises I show you. So the first, already now, reflection is to think about what triggers you most, what burdens you most in the situation or in the long run. It can be something that has some connection to your personal life. It can be, for instance, if you have children yourself, that the stories about children who are suffering is the most triggering. Or it can be that if you have had a separation, a loss in your life, that hearing about people who have lost their dear ones triggers you more than, for instance, your colleague. So it has to be, you have to be careful thinking about what kind of things triggers me. And stop the film, take 3 minutes, write down on a piece of paper what you notice, what you reflect upon, what triggers you. What do we mean by, as a helper, we can get hurt? There has been quite a lot of research about people who have been in the helping business for a long time and how they react. And they have developed several concepts that are somehow similar, but they have some nuances that makes them different. Sometimes we call something secondary traumatization, and sometimes you will hear the concept of vicarious traumatization, and sometimes you will hear people talking about burned out or compassion fatigue. They are similar in some ways, but I will also explain why we need all the three concepts, because they differ somehow. But just to say from the beginning that being a helper, doing something to help other people during war and stress and crisis is not only a burden, it's also very meaningful. It's also creates a passion for your work and creates a personal growth, because it has meaning and it has purpose and you feel you can influence something. But in order for it to be a growth and not a burden or a hurt, who's responsible are we talking about here? In ordinary life we would say it's the employer, it's your colleague group, and it's yourself. I don't know during your time in Ukraine during wartime how well organized your work is. But usually the employer is responsible for your working condition physically and also for your workload, your quantity of work. And that it should be, from the employer's side, some debriefing possibilities and some variation in your work. And some kind of support and refill. The colleagues are also very important, that you take the responsibility as a colleague to give support to your other colleagues and to ask for support. To share experiences, have good feedback processes. To have some kind of difference between when we work and when we have a break. And feeling that you are responsible with the others to create a good colleague atmosphere, company culture. And then there is an individual responsibility on all of us to self-observation, to be attentive and aware, and really recognize our own reactions. I speak of experience because I'm not very good at this, actually. And when I was younger, I was even worse. And my weak point was my back. And I was a lone mother with 3 children and bad economy. And every time the children went to their father, I was divorced, and every time the children went to their father, I somehow had a collapse in my back and was lying and had terrible pain. And every time I thought, oh, I knew. I have had these signals for many days now. So if I had observed it and taken it seriously previously, I could have avoided this collapse. So that's why I'm so concerned about being aware of the signals in time. But when we talk about these concepts, we talk about different dimensions in the helper. It's our emotions, it's our symptom and behavior, it's how our cognitive functioning, how cognitive style and our belief system can be affected, and how we manage being in a stress situation and whether we find good coping skills. So I'll go through the concept that I've presented to you, and I'll try to explain them. When we talk about secondary traumatization, that is connected to listening to stories with strong traumatic content. And I've worked so much with rape and with sexual abuse of small children, and I really feel that some of these stories, even if they are 20, 30 years old, I still have a picture in my head. And I haven't, I mean, it's crazy because I haven't seen it, but I've heard the stories, and it's like I have some of the same symptoms as a patient can get, that you have a sort of invading picture in your head. So, secondary traumatization is connected to that you get some of the same reactions as a PTSD patient might have. That you have invading, intrusive images, that you have avoidance signs, you want to distance yourself, you don't want to hear about it, you don't want to read about it, and you have a sort of activated state of mind. You have easily startled, you are easily irritated, etc. So that your reactions resembles the main characteristics that a PTSD patient would have. And the concept of vicarious traumatization is more, it's not really this intrusive memories or intrusive pictures, it's more a cognitive influence that doesn't come from one story or one patient or one person, but it's more over time, this feeling of cognitive changes in you, that your feeling of who am I, what am I worth, what do I think of others. I become quite critical. I can become quite critical about both myself and others and think, what do they know? And sometimes you seem to lose your feeling of meaning of life and your view of reality. You get pessimistic, sometimes a bit cynical, and you don't think the world is a good place to be. So it's about your thinking. And here I've just described beliefs, but it is also affecting your cognitive capacity, your capacity for concentration, your capacity for memory. You forget things, you really can't concentrate and be effective in your work. And then you have this concept of burned out or compassion fatigue, which is sort of mix. It's both, it's called the cost of caring, that you feel exhausted and physically and mentally tired, that you feel empty, you lose your motivation, you devaluate yourself and others, and you have sort of more negative, you don't have all this empathy to give to others, so you have a more cynical or indifferent attitude towards your clients. You can feel depressed, boredom, hopelessness, and have sleep problems, and you can get sick. Actually, it's some research upon, for instance, cancer and serious illness that could be correlated to burnout symptoms. And the literature says that the vulnerable ones are nurses, physicians, other therapists, other helpers with a high capacity for empathy, feeling of pain of the victim, strong desire to relieve wounds, and high degree of exposure. And I would possibly add also high demands upon yourself. Perhaps unrealistic demands upon yourself. So I want you to stop the film and reflect upon this. How do you notice that something you're working with is overloading you? Is it physical signs? Is it thoughts? Is it feelings? Is it actions? And what do you think your colleagues notice? Perhaps you don't notice it yourself, but perhaps your colleagues notice that you are so much more quick to get irritated, for instance, frustrated, so little tolerance. And also think a bit about what do you need from your colleagues when you feel like this. And what kind of help from yourself, from a colleague, and from your employer do you need? So how do I understand my signals, both in the situation and in the long term? And if you are listening as a group now, try to do this as a group exercise. Along which dimensions? In the body, in the emotions, in the cognitive field, or in the social relational field? Or is it other changes that you should be aware of? I didn't talk really, I'm going to talk a bit more about what I mean by social relational reactions, because very often it means that you withdraw. You withdraw from your colleagues, you withdraw from your friends, you want to be alone. So stop the film. Either you go and make a reflection and write down on the paper for yourself, or you do go into a group and discuss and exchange experiences. And we will go a bit further into details about all these dimensions. Yeah, we talked a bit about workload as one of the risk factors, and the high demands on yourself, and perhaps unrealistic demands on our own abilities. Because the engagement and motivation and empathy is high in helpers, the capacity for realistic goals are sometimes not clear enough. That you set yourself too high goals, you set yourself too high standard for what should be the result of my work. You get very frustrated because you meet some people that you are not able to help, and you take it upon yourself. So that's the personal risk factors, that these demands and these unrealistic thoughts are too high. But there can be also risk in your surroundings. That your workload, and I've in these days also spoken to people in Ukraine that are working with traumatized children, and I hear that they have so long days and so many hours a day and so many cases a day that I think, please, please, please slow down, because even if you think the need is so high, if you're gonna last, you can't have this workload for a long, long time. It's a risk factor also if you feel that you don't have any influence upon your situation, that your employer, the school, whatever your leader is just giving you much more and more and more demands. And if you feel that you don't have any support from your colleagues and not any feedback, and you feel isolated, this is very, very much a risk factor. So again, I go back to what should we be aware of? Where do the signals come? I said in me it came in the back, but it also came that I realized that my children at home, when they complained about something they didn't like having happened during the day in school, I got irritated because I was working with so much traumatized children that I thought they should not come with these tiny details. And when you get that daily harassment is not something you bother with, you get irritated by being exposed to them, you know that's a sort of signal. So being aware, where are my signals coming first? So let's go in a bit deeper into what kind of physical reactions should you be aware of. It could be muscle pain, that you feel tense in your shoulders, some people wake up in the night and find themselves biting, shoulders, neck, or it could be inside your body, so your stomach, pain, changes in your appetite, etc. It could be headaches, dizziness, it could be high blood pressure, etc. So it could be many kind of physical signals that you should be aware of. Or it could be changes in your emotional state, that you feel more stressed, irritable, what I said, a shorter tolerance for everyday problem, mood swings, and that's that you're feeling down, or perhaps that you are a bit more insensitive and feeling a bit cold. I don't care. I really don't manage to care anymore. It's a terrible feeling, actually, when you know that usually I consider myself to be an ordinary empathic person. And now you tell me this story and I don't feel any reactions. It's a terrible feeling, actually. And you could have these cognitive changes, that you have shorter concentration span, you have weakened your capacity for focusing, you have gaps in your memory, and you have more cynical, pessimistic, suspicious, and more self-critical attitude. That's cognitive changes. And you can have social signals, withdrawal, isolation, more judgmental in general, not only towards certain people, but in general. And you don't want to get involved in other people's problems. And it could be other possible behavioral changes. Changes is the key word here. That you sleep differently, you eat differently, you drink differently, etc. So why should we be this self-aware? Isn't it to be very self-conscious, to take oneself too serious? Other people have much more problems than I have. Should I be so concerned about myself? And I think that's the main trap we fall into, that other people's problems seem to be so large. So my problem should be ignored. But if you're going to last for a long time, you have to be aware so that you can take your precautions early enough. So what helps? What are the good factors? It's ordinary good things. It's good health, recreation, meaningful relationships, creativity, feeling of influence. It's that you have a worth and dignity, that you are able to talk nicely to yourself and give yourself credit for what you do, not always criticizing yourself and saying what you can't do. That you get some support and help from others, and that you feel that you're part of something, that you are not alone, that you're part of a whole. The trouble is that we always actually know what helps, and then we don't use it. We feel too tired to seek actually what we know helps. That's a paradox, and I'm very, very often noticing that myself, that I know that just for now I should pick up my telephone, call some friends, or go for a walk, or look at something nice, or listen to some beautiful music, and then I sit in front of the television and I don't do anything that gives me any new energy. So it's a big paradox that we know and we don't use what we know. Yeah, what helps? It helps sometimes to have this knowledge, to be aware, and to know yourself. This is my weak point. This is what burdens me. This is where I get my signals from. And this is where I can get support. I know that even if I see that the need around me is so big, I am able to set boundaries, to see I can't do more than this. And that you have some protection strategies. It is also important, and I've tried to talk to some of the Ukrainian psychologists that I have contact with in Ukraine. Could you possibly think of doing some variation in your work? Perhaps you shouldn't see clients all day. Perhaps you also should give supervision to colleagues, or give lectures, or have a time for reading, so that you have a sort of variation in your work, not only doing the same thing again and again. And try to have also a private life, to have some social connection that is not connected to the work. Yeah, and exercises, creative work, etc. And make a nice meal, make nice food, rest. All these things that we know helps. Yeah, try to have to write down and see what do I know helps me. Yeah, it's also many factors that could be done if you are in an organization that has some structure. We have mentioned some of them previously. And also counseling is a good thing, because sometimes it's not that you get new advices or new knowledge, it's that you share with someone. That you get some individual guidance or group training, but also that you share with your colleagues, you give and receive support from And perhaps also I would say that sometimes our compassion is not enough. We also, in order to last longer, we need to have some kind of cognitive curiosity. Why do people react this way? How are people changed? How can people find new ways, etc.? And then the last part is really, really to know what gives you energy. I've mentioned something, but I will also mention a model called Basic pH. It's developed from a group in Tel Aviv, and especially I have met the leader of this group called Ofra Ayalon, who says that they have studied all the literature about what helps people during stressful time. What are the best coping strategies? And she says, and I very much use this both for myself and in my work, to say what seemed to help people come through stressful times is if they are aware of a good belief and value system. If they have a religious or a political or a human right or whatever, but that they have a sort of knowing that these are my values. And remind yourself, the reason why I do this is because my values is in this work. And then the A in this basic stands for your affects. You need to have access to your own feelings, that you actually recognize what you're feeling, and that you are able to own them and to accept them, tolerate them. Yes, I get a bit irritated when I hear about details. Yes, I am able to put words to it without being judgmental towards myself. I am also able to regulate my affect. When I get upset, I know some methods to calm down. I'm able to express my feelings. I'm able to share them. I'm able to have this self-compassion. That also seems to have a protective factor. And then the S is for social support in all kinds, talking about, sharing, and sharing with your colleagues, having guidance, having debriefing, but also having social contact with somebody outside your work, as we talked about. The I is perhaps the most surprising in a way, that this team said that art in all kinds of art, imagery is fantasy, symbols, art, music, pictures, books, everything has this healing effect upon us. And then the C stands for the cognition, that you understand, that you learn something new, that you develop your cognitive function, that you really feel that now I've acquired some new skills. That really helps you, and you understand the circumstances you're working in. And the pH stands for all kind of bodily exposure, the physical well-being. It can be relaxation, it can be yoga, it can be exercising, it can be running. Whatever, but taking care of your body. And the exercise connecting to this is actually if you look upon the basic PH, the belief system, affect, social, imagery, cognition, physical, can you find your favorite strategy? What do you always do? Do you always cry or express your emotions? Or do you always call your friends? Or do you always listen to music or go to a religious ceremony? Find your favorite strategy. And that's good. You shouldn't change that. If it works for you, you should use it. But, it's a but. Because sometimes we use our favorite strategy and only that. And we need to have a big variety of coping strategies. Very often when I've worked with families, the fathers, the stereotype is that fathers say they do exercise, they run, and mother says, I call my friends, I talk to my girlfriends. So the one uses PH and one uses social. But try to expand. Try to see, okay, now I know my favorite. Is there any of these coping strategies that I don't use? That I haven't thought of would be a good idea? To listen to music, to go to art exhibitions or whatever, to go into the nature, etc. Yeah, so how can we cope for a long period? Because that is the aim, isn't it? That we should be able to be good helpers for a longer period, not quit after. So, to repeat myself, it's that we have good realistic demands, not too high, that we have breaks in our work, that we actually try to remember to use art, to see good things, look at good things, to listen to good music, etc. Humor is a very important source for energy. The very famous psychologist or psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived different concentration camps, describes how much humor was a source of energy for people to survive. And then also this sharing with colleagues and with others and the variation in your work. And then also that you have a feeling of a personal growth and professional growth, that you learn new things, that you feel that you yourself is not only giving, but you are also receiving something. Yes. That was this session, so thank you.